Prescribed fires have more benefits than just reducing wildfire risk. These managed fires can be used to create habitat for wildlife or make existing habitat more favorable for certain species. For a long time, land managers have recognized the benefits of prescribed fires for wild turkeys. Wild turkey abundance and productivity have declined in recent years in some locations, in part because of poor habitat quality. In these degraded locations, prescribed fires can be used as a cost-effective tool to manipulate vegetation and recreate conditions favorable for turkeys during a portion of their annual life cycle. Throughout the eastern U.S., wild turkey depend on open forest, woodlands, and early successional vegetation, all of which have become less common on the current landscape, in part because of fire suppression and reduction of human fire ignitions. Prescribed fires can promote vegetation conditions that provide brooding, foraging, and nesting cover, while also limiting the dense, close canopies that offer low-quality food and cover for turkeys. Two very important characteristics of prescribed fires for wild turkeys are fire seasonality and fire frequency. A common misconception is that prescribed fires during the growing season, which is when turkeys are nesting, often lead to the destruction of many nests by fire. However, extensive research has observed that growing season fires have little impact on turkey nesting success. In fact, most prescribed burning occurs at a relatively small scale, with burn units less than 50 acres. So population level effects are unlikely. Even if a nest is destroyed during a prescribed burn, hen turkeys often will re-nest in a nearby unburned patch. A recent study on Fort Bragg military installation in North Carolina showed that most wild turkeys were located in lowland areas that were less likely to burn during prescribed fires than the adjacent uplands. However, burning very large areas at once during the nesting period could destroy many nests and nesting cover, so smaller prescribed fires of approximately 30 to 55 acres are recommended. If large areas are scheduled to be burned, prescribed fires should occur in the dormant season when turkeys are not nesting or brooding. Turkey nests and poults tend to be the most vulnerable during a fire, whereas adult turkeys can avoid most fires by running, flying, or roosting away from the burn zone. Turkey poults are capable of moving considerable distances from the nest within 24 hours of hatching, which makes them less susceptible to being burned by prescribed fire. Fires still pose a risk to poults less than 2 weeks old because they cannot fly or roost in trees. Turkeys commonly move into recently burned areas because fire removes the litter and exposes seeds and invertebrates that are important food. Fire can alter the abundance for certain invertebrate species that turkeys use as food source, with some invertebrates decreasing in abundance over time after a fire and others increasing over time after a prescribed burn. However, a recent study in the North Carolina Sandhills showed that frequent fires did not affect the overall biomass of invertebrates eaten by turkeys. Hens typically nest in areas that have been burned within the last 2 to 3 years, but forage in more recently burned treeless areas during the pre-nesting period. Studies suggest that females select nest sites in areas burned within the previous 3 years because these areas contain the ideal mix of herbaceous plants and low woody vegetation that provide sufficient concealment cover but also allow the hen to quickly escape if a predator should approach. During the brood rearing period, females select habitat based on changing resource requirements of poults as they age beyond 14 days and become able to roost in trees. These broods roost at night at sites not recently burned, typically 3 to 6 years post-fire, but forage for invertebrates in areas burned 1 to 2 years prior during the day. Hens will even lead their broods into areas burned within the previous few months. During the non-breeding season, turkeys more often use areas not typically burned, such as hardwood forest and bottomlands, drainages, and swamps. When it comes to using prescribed fires to help conserve wild turkey habitat, some important highlights to remember are: variable fire frequencies can help maintain the variety of habitat conditions that wild turkeys require during their annual life cycle. Growing season fires have a small impact in turkey nesting success. Small burns of 30 to 55 acres are generally recommended. Turkey poults are the most at risk during a fire. Research has shown that fire does not affect overall invertebrate biomass eaten by turkeys. Hens nest in areas burned in the last 2 to 3 years. Hens forage in recently burned treeless areas. Broods roost at sites burned in the last 3 to 6 years, but forage at sites burned in the last 1 to 2 years. The use of prescribed fire as a management tool to increase habitat availability for wild turkeys is on the rise. It is important for wildlife managers to understand how prescribed fire influences the wild turkeys they manage, including the nuances of how turkey habitat use changes over time following each burn event.